Good evening, I'm DK Ross. Now, welcome back to the TTT News. Friday, the 27th of July, 1990, a date that remains etched in the minds of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, a day that brought an event that many had never anticipated. Yassin Abu Bakr, leader of the Jamaat al-Muslimin, and his 113 followers stormed the Parliament building and the lone television house at the time and announced a takeover. There was an attempted coup in Trinidad and Tobago 30 years ago, but with no national formalized memorial to speak of, that event can be fading from the national consciousness. Now, from my perspective, class is in session this evening as I get to sit at the feet of veteran journalist Tony Fraser to get his perspective, some of his perspectives 30 years on. And now this is both as an individual and as a journalist. Good evening, Tony. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, DK.
Now, what were some of the issues that would have led to some of the headlines of the day? And this is even before news of the attempted coup.
For some time before the actual day, the 27th of July, there was obvious action by the Jamaat al-Muslimin attempting to get the public's attention for all kinds of issues that it brought to the fore. And therefore, the media were covering quite a lot, covering the events that the Jamaat, I remember, in front of the Parliament, a protest action and so on. So there were a number of things, and the Jamaat was well known in the circumstances because of the actions that were taking place, and the media interacted with them all the time.
No. For occasions like this, many people would remember down to the day, down to the shirt that they wore. How did the news unfold to you? Where were you at the time, and what was happening with you?
Well, I was in Tobago. I had gone to Tobago on vacation with my family. There were a number of things that happened around that which are not important for the moment. Actually, I was in the bathroom when the thing happened, and I remember my sister-in-law pounding on the door and saying that, so, come out, something is happening on television. And when I came out, I saw Abu Bakr on television making all kinds of statements. Immediately, the vacation mood fell away, and I fell into the role of reporter journalist attempting to cover the situations, getting in touch, or at least attempting to get in touch with my colleagues in Trinidad and Tobago in the room of TTT. That did not succeed because of the phone situation and all of that. And the situation developed after that. I was then a reporter for the Associated Press, the international news agency, which covers the world, and therefore I reported to the AP. We did not get out of Tobago until Monday, sometime in the afternoon. And again, I fell into stride by reporting on what I could get as to what was happening in the Parliament.
Looking back, and you're saying that Associated Press, what were some of the headlines that you would have been seeing from outside of Trinidad speaking to the situation in Trinidad and Tobago?
That was 30 years ago, DK. And the kind of access that we have to the international media today, we simply didn't have at that point in time. So, you heard one or two things on BBC and so on, but not a whole lot of it. It wasn't like the today situation of interactive media all over the world.
And part of the reason I asked that question is because I had an immediate family member who was out of the country at the time, and with her listening to the media that she could, because as you said, there wasn't that immediacy of information. She was hearing things like St. Vincent Street is bloody and just going down the line like that. So, but in terms of the Jamaat actually raising some issues and having the media cover them before, issues coming to the fore while in power or during that event, the attempted coup, were they in lockstep with what they were saying before, just before?
Well, they weren't threatening, as I remember. They weren't threatening the country, but they were certainly making their points about their position in the society, and they felt deprived by the administration of the day. But the kinds of threats that you may have expected did not happen. because this thing happened. It caught a lot of people offside, as it were. There have been reports as that something had been brewing down at Mukurako, but it was not front and center, and people simply did not expect this to happen because those were the days before this kind of thing could have happened.
Now, 30 years on, I give you the opportunity to answer this either as a journalist or as an individual or a mix of both, anyhow you want to do it. But 30 years on, 30 years hence, from your vantage point, do you think that society has possibly learned enough to avoid a similar event?
Well, to answer that in a broad kind of way, clearly the situation in terms of social disorder, crime, and so on, those situations have deteriorated even further than they were back in 1990. So that if you're talking about the society learning from those circumstances, we haven't learned because the situation has overtaken us in many ways. And if you look at the disorder in the society from 1990 to the present, you would see the clear deterioration of that social kind of strength and functioning that we once had. And so therefore my immediate response was that we didn't learn. However, I am sure that the security forces, the army, especially the army, the police, the Coast Guard, may not be caught offside, as much offside if something like that, if you're asking that, if some other group or individuals were to attempt such a situation, it would be a very difficult situation.
And sometimes I wonder about the mindset that we, whether or not is mindset as individuals or as a nation, because you would hear talk or stories of people attending coup parties, and not necessarily saying that they are similar or comparable, but in this day and age where we have the pandemic, we see people still trying to persuade people that there are some things that just make sense at this time, wearing a mask, washing hands. So sometimes I wonder whether or not the mindset is the thing that we really need to try to address.
Yes, definitely. As I said, the social order has deteriorated, and we are not as alert to possibilities happening to us as we should. You know, over the weekend, there were some fears late last week about the storm occurrence. And I suppose having escaped once more, that God is a tree kind of notion would have sunk a little bit deeper into our consciousness and not pay the kind of regard as that we should to events that can happen to us in the society.
All right. No, there's a topic that I really want to get to in terms of a special connection that you have with this event, but we do that after this break. We are speaking with Tony Fraser about the 1990 attempted coup. So we do that after this break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking with Tony Fraser about his perspective 30 years on. It is the 30th anniversary of the attempted coup in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Tony, you said that you were in Tobago at the time, but at the same time, you have a special connection with regard to information about the event. I hear your boss a mark. Please, talk to us about it.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, DK. Yes, I did. When I returned to Trinidad from Tobago, the obvious thing, as I said, was to attempt to contact. I contacted a man called Kwesi Atiba, who was the Wazir of Information of the Jamaat al-Muslimin. I had some connection with him before, reporting on matters to do with the Jamaat. So I naturally made a call to the Parliament, and I found him. And he told me about the circumstances and why they did what they did. And I reported that well, as I said, I was working with Trinidad and Tobago Television, but the station was off the air in terms of normal programming. So I reported to the AP and so on. But on the Tuesday, the Tuesday morning, and sometimes I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday morning, but anyhow, the Tuesday morning, they called me. I was in the shower actually at 2 a.m. in the morning because there was no sleep. You were interacting all the time. And they said that Mr. Robinson, the Prime Minister, wanted to speak to me. But before Mr. Robinson came on the phone, Selwyn Richardson, who was then the Minister of National Security, he came on the phone and he told me all that was happening in a rush, as Selwyn Richardson is wont to do. And he told me they had signed an amnesty. Now, we had not heard anything at all about that before. They had signed an amnesty with the Jamaat al-Muslimin, and the arrangement was that all of the members of parliament inside of the parliament were to be set free, and so too afterwards the members of the Jamaat. And he said this had taken place since the Saturday, and they were getting worried because time had passed, 48, 76 hours, 72 hours had passed, and nothing had happened. And so they became concerned. If you were outside, that was fine, but if you were inside and bullets were coming to the Red House, and they didn't have names on them, so anybody could get struck with them. So what transpired is that they attempted to get the word out that an amnesty had been signed, and therefore they should be out of the building. So I asked Mr. Robinson the natural question, why did you call me, a reporter, a journalist? And he gave me a bramble, and I understood what the bramble meant. He said, oh, I can't get in touch with Colonel Theodore because who was the head of the army, and he's out in the field working and so on. So I understood the message that Mr. Robinson was giving to me. So I did the natural thing when I came off the telephone. Incidentally, I spoke to Bilal Abdullah, who was the head of the Jamaat inside the parliament. They gave me a number to call Abu Bakr. I spoke to Abu Bakr. I spoke to my news director, Jones Madeira, who was inside there, and Raul Panted. So I had the story. And the natural thing I did to it, the natural thing was to call the local radio station, 610 Radio, which was the only station on the air at that point in time. But I said, I want to be careful. I called the Associated Press and I gave the story to them. I know nobody could interfere with what the AP had, and the AP blasted the story on the air. And then I called 610 Radio. I called for my colleague Wesley Gibbons. He was not at the station, but I got on to Dennis McCovey and I told the story about the amnesty being signed, and that there was a difficulty in having the amnesty be applied so that those persons in the parliament could get out of the parliament and look for safety. Remember, Mr. Robinson had been shot on the first day, and 3-4 days had passed, and clearly attention was needed. There were people who were talking foolishness about the ministers joining with their captors, but obviously that was foolishness. When you enter a situation there, anything could happen, and therefore you wanted out. Now, there was a team of ministers who were pulled up, as I understood it, at the Hilton Hotel. And this is the core of what I thought. Nobody told me this, but the circumstances seem to have led to this kind of thinking. Those outside did not want news of the amnesty to get out, because that would show weakened government positions, that they were surrendering to Abu Bakr and company. So they wanted to keep the lid on this until they could get the Muslimin out of the parliament. But those inside did not feel so, and they wanted to get out. So when I made the report both at AP and on 610 Radio, all hell broke loose.
No, from Saturday to Tuesday, there's this gap. Now, you spoke of some of the reasons, but do you think, and I want to ask you as a journalist, I want to ask you as a person, how did you feel in that position? And I say that because you have this information, and subsequently you were also asked, but these people could have been pressured into doing this amnesty. So what is going through your mind when you have this information and you haven't acted on it as yet?
Yeah, it took about 15 seconds to make a determination what to do. And I my journalistic instinct came in to play immediately. I am a reporter, I'm a journalist, I'm not a judge, I'm nothing like that. My business is to report the news as I have got it in a credible kind of way. I've spoken to a number of sources and they have all agreed that that is the situation. So I threw everything else behind. What happened after was not my business, in the sense that I was not going to be the ultimate arbiter in all of this. I'm not an arbiter at all. I'm a reporter whose business is reporting the news as he has it in a credible kind of way, and devil take the hindmost after that.
Speaking of devil taking the hindmost, what do you think could have been some of the possibilities or the outcomes had the news of the amnesty not come out? Because you said that there were some mobilizations taking place.
Well, you know, let me relate a conversation that I heard Clive Martin, of course, when he was alive, talk about. He was one of the ministers outside. And he said to the effect that they were getting information from FBI, from external sources, etc. And one of the pieces of information that they got as a group of people was that they should take off the power in the Red House. Now, Bilal Abdullah had obviously done his homework on these kinds of actions, and the information to his men was that anytime the lights go out, then you have free rein to shoot everybody, because that signaled an indication that the building was going to be stormed at that point in time. So if that had happened, and according to Clive Pantin, we don't know why they didn't do it. There was no special reason. They simply didn't do it. So that it was a kind of by luck with chance kind of situation happening. That would have left us in serious, serious pain for a number of years.
Moving forward, how do we treat this day in history in Trinidad and Tobago? And I say that because 30 years is longer than some of our nationals have been alive. So the significance of this event to you might be very different from someone who is 20 years old. How do we address this and head on and move forward?
You know, the thought, as an individual, I don't think too much about it. As a journalist, I think about it a lot. And one of the really sad things is that we allowed this situation to go on for a long period of time. I can't remember the exact number of years before there was some kind of investigation into it. By that time, of course, people's minds had forgotten details about this and that, and there was no longer a kind of ready enthusiasm in the population to reflect on 1990. I think it was really unfortunate that something was not done immediately after to find out the sources of what took place and what pushed them into the center, not necessarily to punish anybody, but to make ourselves fully aware of the things that we need to avoid into the future.
Looking at dealing and healing, we see there's a conversation about pulling down certain statues. Do you think that something physical in terms of a physical structure, memorial should be put up? Do you think that there should be some sort of conversation? If so, how should that be structured? And once again, this is me asking you both as a journalist and as an individual.
Yes. Yeah, monuments and so on are fine. But you know what I think mainly lacking, DK, is the absence of deep knowledge of what transpired in 1990 and before. I don't know what the school curriculum is. I don't know what is being taught at UA in terms of the history of these matters and so on. Is that the society does not have a real appreciation for what transpired in 1990 and how we should look at 1990 and so on. Some work has been done. Selwyn Ryan has written something, Ramesh Deosaran wrote something, etc., etc. But by and large, I don't think this society has immersed itself fully in an understanding and an appreciation of what transpired and how we should look on possibilities like these in the society.
All right, so we want to thank you very much, Tony, both for just information as well as sharing some of your views as a person and individual as opposed to just a journalist or as opposed to a journalist. And we want to thank you for tuning in on behalf of our entire news team. I'm DK Roster. Thank you for joining. Good night.